All right. Welcome to episode 1, season 2 of Invented Bodies. I'm your host, Jade Duggan, and we are here with Bethany and Missy, who I will give you a little more run of in a second. Our topic today is the embodiment of showing up. What does it look like to show up? How do we do it? How do we do it together? How do we do it at work? How do we do it for ourselves? And what does it matter? So we did a little bit of a different format this season. Last season, we were not live. We had guests coming in, and then we had a conversation, the three of us. And it was so much fun that I realized that this is what I wanted you guys to get. I wanted you guys to get how we show up together, because that's really the point of how we invent the new bodies that we're going to cultivate for the future. So gratefully, Bethany, who is our brilliant podcast producer, agreed to come on and have conversation with us. And Missy, who you sometimes don't see, but you probably get an email from her if you ever interact with our organization. And she's holder of all the things. She keeps my tail literally pinned on, even all the way from a few states away. So welcome, loves. I'm so grateful that we're here this evening. And just say a little bit. How are you guys doing today? What's going on? Give us a little taste.
Anytime I can be in the presence of you and Missy, it is a damn good time. And we don't even mean for it to happen, but we just go on the most intellectual tangents. And every time I engage with each of you, I get off that call and I'm like, I am 55% smarter than when I joined that call. So when you invited me to be a part of this season, even though I'm going to be editing it in the background, I had to say yes, because it is going to be such an amazing experience for not only the listeners, but for me as well, and in a whole different realm in how we work together. So I'm delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to this all day. So yes, that's me. That's what I do.
And I'm here to make sure that these two don't go completely off on a crazy tangent, because they would probably, if I wasn't here to pull them back down. So somebody's gotta stay a little bit to the side. And I'm super excited to do this. This is way out of my comfort zone, and I'm way excited to do this with you ladies.
I'm excited too.
I see Missy as holding the balloon strings to keep us earthed, as Jade and I are just floating into the stratosphere.
You know what else I like? Missy will drop in these like funny little historical details that you didn't know, like trivia that's just the most fascinating and yet most pertinent thing for the conversation at hand at any given moment. So
I am a Jeopardy buff.
You are. Yeah, you definitely are. And I'm looking forward to also like people seeing us be comfortable and in conversation, because the art of conversation is something that is really important to me, and is how we evolve conversations are really important. And so I just want to add that one of the reasons we really wanted to do this season this way was that we noticed that having conversations where we brought somebody in a more formal conversational setting, the structure of like, who do I want to be and how do I want to present myself became the forefront of the conversation. And while we'd get comfortable over the course of the time together, it's not exactly the same as if you guys get to watch us, dear listeners, watchers, whoever you are, over the course of the next episodes. What you'll see is a conversation evolving and us getting comfortable with each other and with you watching us be in kind of a natural state of showing up in some way.
I absolutely agree with that. We have topics that we are going to be seeking out in each particular episode, but I feel like how we relate to each other and how we build upon each other is so organic that you can't really script that. What we do is uncharted territory when we get together, because we never know what is going to highlight or spark or pique the next portion of the conversation. And when I engage with you and Missy, how I show up is in my natural organic state. We had talked earlier in preparation for this episode about how changing not really your persona, but changing your energy for people who don't share or enjoy your type of energy, because I am a high energy person. And if there is somebody who is a lower energy that I overwhelm them, I am very cognizant of that. And I think that that is also part of showing up. Are you showing up as your full self? Are you kind of quieting your full self to appease the other person? Because showing up is also being aware of the other person in which you're engaging with.
Yeah, I actually had a great conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking actually about, she's somebody who's been teaching for a long time, as a facilitator of sorts. And we were talking about the sense of like being an empty vessel in a certain way and being able to just be fluid and mirror people, and how for some people that feels inauthentic because they have a very like a strong sense of themselves, right? Like you identify as being high energy, and most of the times that I see you, that's pretty accurate. Like, and whereas I also have this sense a little bit of, my husband will joke that he doesn't actually know what my natural accent is because I have a different accent depending on who I'm talking to. And it's not intentional. It's more that fluidity of I'm more likely to be not aware of what my values and my commitments are, but also adapting to what it can be heard, or what is the language frame that I'm actually speaking in, or who am I talking to, and what's their frame of reference, so that it's a useful conversation, right? So that's sort of, and that we're talking about how we all kind of have a spectrum of that, right? All the way from, the autistic children that I used to treat in my clinic, who would, maybe not mirror at all, at least in some ways, and on the other end of it, people who just adapt and adapt and adapt. And like, how do you show up? And then how do you show up in different ways with different people? And is it intentional, right? Is it accidental? Or, and then some of the cultural conversations that show up with that, like, well, that's just how I am. You guys need to adapt, right? Which becomes that conversation of the larger social body and how we do showing up as a larger, conversation, right? How do the three of us show up together? If I keep talking and don't let you guys get a word in edgewise, that's going to be a different body that we'll create together.
I love that. And you have such experience in the physiological and the biological. You have such history with that because you're educated in that so well. And it's funny that you say about linguistics, because there was something that I was reading in which it was saying that your vernacular changes based upon who you are around the majority of the time. And that is why when you go home, your verbiage and your accent and your tongue can be significantly different than when I'm speaking to you, Jade. It's very different from when I'm speaking to my mama. Because there is and it's not even something that you intend to do, but because of that mimicking is kind of a show of love.
Mm-hmm.
For their comfort as well as for your comfort, because that when you're with them, that's your natural state. When I'm with you, this is my natural state. When I'm speaking to Missy, this is my natural state. Missy, how do you feel? Do you feel like when you're speaking to certain individuals, because you've known Jade for a very long time?
Yes. So yeah, that's funny because like, I feel like there's a different body that I bring to say this conversation with the two of us than body with like the class that we have, right? It's just a different kind of showing up. It's still present, it's still me, but it's a different me.
It's an event, right? There's two different bodies, right? You're inhabiting
There's
at least two different bodies.
There's a classroom me and there's a podcast me now.
Yeah. And so Bethany has a mom me and Missy has a class Missy, and right. And I was just thinking about how many, right? That's the name of the whole podcast, Invented Bodies. And that's exactly why, is because we already have so many of them that we inhabit, and even in one day's time, right? You with your mom in one setting, you with your mom maybe in another setting, right? Like different conversation in the bank than in the kitchen, maybe, right? Yeah. And like, is our work selves and our home selves. And it's interesting because also, I want to be conscientious of the conversation around like, where does code switching fit into this? Where does, assimilation fit into this? And how much of it is, where is it love? And where is it adaptation for safety? And how do we even know which body, especially because so much of it happens without our even recognizing that we're doing it?
I agree with that very much. As somebody who worked in corporate for almost 20 years, I worked in the criminal justice system. I was literally the only a person of color, actually, I worked at the DA's office, in the entire courthouse. Our office was located at the bottom of the courthouse. And I was the only person of color for the majority of the time that I worked there. So when people would engage in conversation with me over the phone and then meet me in person, some people would literally say to me, "You're Bethany? I didn't expect you to look like that." And I'm like, "Well, what you expect me to look like?" And then the tone changes. Like, "What did you expect to see when you came across thee?" Like, so knowing, and like you said, I think that it happens because there is this expectation and there is like this patriarchal idea of speaking well. Like, she's a Black woman, she speaks so well. Well, what does that even mean? That is a social norm construct that people have determined this is the proper way of speech. Or some people would look at me and be like, "Oh, she's so bougie." Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these terms that are thrown around regularly to define somebody is problematic when you don't know who you are.
Say more about that. Like when they don't know who you are and they're labeling you, you mean?
When you don't know who you are. Because if somebody's constantly telling you, "You are bougie, you speak well, or in the other way, like labeling theory, like you are a bad kid, you are problematic. If you don't have a sense of self and you have problems showing up as yourself, you start falling into the trap of believing what people are saying about you.
What's interesting is I see with some of the teenagers in my world that like that's happening around diagnostic, mental health diagnostic labels, right? Like if you behave a certain way, other people will start to ask you, "Well, do you have this, that, or the other thing?" And it becomes this sort of tricky feedback loop where, right, do I not? How do I know? Right. And then at what point, right, do you take the body to the professional for the, the blessing of the actual diagnosis in a certain way, so that you can then go back and say, "Yeah, I do have it. That's how come I behave this way." Or, right, it's such a, right, or is it just, or is it still fluid? In which case, if you don't get that, right, say you don't get that label, or you go to a doctor who's, a little bit more conservative about diagnosis, and then you have to go back to your friend group and say, "I don't know why I behave this way. It's just kind of how I am." And so the even that act of that patriarchal actually act of diagnosing, I mean, don't get me started on the whole psychiatry industry and how it started essentially to, try to help women suppress themselves in myriad ways, to tell us that we are wrong and hysterical, and now any number of other things, for being different, right? For being different than their particular standard, which sort of leads back into that same conversation about what is the label, what is acceptable, what body do we allow ourselves to bring, much less what body do other people think we ought to bring to something.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because for decades I have all of these weird little idiosyncrasies. And then I was diagnosed with OCD. And I was like, that makes sense. That explains so much of why I do, as well as general anxiety disorder. And I fit into all of these boxes. And having somebody say to me, this is it, this is what I'm calling it, made me feel so much better
Interesting.
because I didn't know why I did all of these things.
Were you aware of those things being not okay or different, or like were other people looking, like were you doing things and feeling like I'm the only one doing this? Other people don't do you know what I mean? Like who was creating the normalization of whether or not that was like, do you know?
So my in my household, it was very controlled. Like my house was very clean, and my father, when he would go shopping, he would occasionally get very overwhelmed with all of the people. And my mother was very particular to have, because when my mother was younger, in her upbringing, there was a lot of chaos. So her decision was, when she was in her own place, when she had her own space, visually,
Mm.
there was going to be no chaos. It was going to be a controlled atmosphere. So I grew up with my house being, my husband says, I've known my husband since we were in 8th grade. We were 13. And my husband still says, I would go to your house and I would like eat off the floor. The house was so clean. So I adapted to that as just part of my childhood. It was just my norm. So as I went to college and I was, like frantically cleaning or having constant monkey brain
Hmm.
about situations in which I couldn't control, because it was my first time being out on my own, and I
Hmm.
had roommates, and you are in a new setting, and I was in New Hampshire for college, and there was like 10 black people and we all had to pool around each other. Like, so there were just so many things that I just did just out of habit. And people would be like, you're doing great in school scholastically. Why are you so concerned? Or I would wait to the
Mm.
very last minute to like do a paper,
Hmm.
even though I knew I had to get this paper done. And that rolls into me eventually being diagnosed with ADHD and procrastination. So, like, all of these things that I would do that made kind of myself crazy. Or
Yeah.
I shouldn't use that term. That's a very like, crazy is very like, but made myself just be aware and see that other people weren't like this. So I don't think it was more so that people were commenting. I think it was my awareness that other people were just living their life and seemed to be at ease when I was constantly angst ridden. And I'm
Got
like,
it.
how do I be you? Like, 'cause I don't like smoking weed. It gives me anxiousness. Like, what is it? Drinking water? Is it consuming a lot of water? Because if that's it, I'll do it.
So it was helpful for you then to have a framework, and then I mean, I guess, right? Like, has it helped you show up then more, or like allowed you to be freer in yourself, and how, speaking of like how you show up?
I think it gave me permission to know that I was okay,
Hmm.
that I wasn't
Interesting.
this weird entity who handled situations in these ways, whatever the situation may be. That if I ruminate on something, it's not because there's something defective with me. It's
Hmm.
just because my brain is wired that way.
Oh,
And
interesting.
with that, I was able to find different ways that I could deal with it. So if I was getting into that spiral of constantly thinking about one particular thing for a long period of time, I learned ways and processes that I can halt that constant monkey brain and say, do I really need to be thinking about this all the live long day? Or can I stop, write it down real quick and say, I'm going to come back to it?
Mm.
I was in my bedroom folding clothes and then I went to go get a drink and now I'm cleaning the kitchen and now I'm washing dishes and now I'm going downstairs and I'm sweeping and vacuuming. Like, what was I doing initially? Like, I was in my room folding clothes.
Yeah. So like gave you a framework actually to kind of catch yourself and come back to yourself and also like, and be okay about it.
And it truly
Interesting.
made me a better communicator because, especially with people that were close to me, if I had a disagreement, I was unwilling to hear what they had to share because I was thinking in my head, I have to articulate this and this is what I'm thinking and this is how I'm feeling, instead of really being giving them an opportunity to share their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed me to stop and say, okay, I'm living in my head and they just, told a whole story that would move the world and I didn't hear a damn word of it.
I'm fascinated by this, but I also want to hear what Missy is thinking because I feel like she's been listening and I'm wondering if you have do you have a question here, Missy?
Well, I have two questions. My first question is, what is monkey brain?
Monkey brain is, well, it's a term that my therapist a long time ago, she didn't coin it, but she actually was the first person to say it to me. And it is when you're, so monkeys are just chaos, right? So it is when your mind takes a particular subject and just runs with it in like a chaotic manner. And for me, I obsess over it. It's just a constant thinking about that particular thing. So if I have a disagreement with like a family member, it will harbor in my mind, or like I will replay the conversation over and over and over again to the point where, and I know that we've had this conversation, I won't sleep because of it. So it's halting that process of letting my brain just run wild and not and no longer me being kind of like a slave to those thoughts.
Okay, my second question is, how do you do that?
Recognizing what's happening and saying, I've been thinking about this for, because I can literally think about a conversation that I've had, and I have very good memory. My graphic designer and my team member, you both know her, Cheryline. She is like, your memory and recall is unsettling. She's like, I don't know how you remember all of the things that you do. And it's funny because this made it hard for me to train my other team members because I just know things. And I'm like, I just know. She's like, how? Like, I but I can recall like I can remember conversations and play it over like a radio. Like I don't even have to rewind the cassette tape. It could just play and play and play and play and play. And all of that is visceral in my body. So the conversation that I had, it's replaying and my body's reacting like I'm still having that conversation, if that makes sense.
100%. Yes, I understand that. So how do you know when you're doing that to yourself and how do you stop it?
Because I do it all the time. Because I live this life. So I've started never just like giving myself permission to recognize, okay, this is happening. I'm not having the conversation, but it is what it is, what it is. Or again, therapy is chef's kiss. Like find a therapist that you really resonate with because mine is just phenomenal. But she had said to me, if you're ruminating on something, write it down and tell yourself, I'm going to come back to it in 2 hours. That way, I'm not ignoring it. My
Right.
brain isn't going into like overdrive, like this is an emergency, like because my brain is like fight or flight essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And Jade, you can say more because you know what happens to the body. But I'm going to be taking care of it. If I need to address something, I know that within that 2 hour time span, I'm gonna get to it. And that cause kind of halted the process of me constantly just living in my head. And also being like, I have other things to do today. Like I can't. I'm busy. Like a bitch is busy.
Okay, so I've told you this before, Bethany, and so for the listeners, you haven't heard this part of the conversation, but you know that literally as you're talking, I'm in my head running numbers. I'm like, what is this costing her business? What is this costing her marriage? What is this costing her life? No, seriously, because I know what this looks like, right, in your individual body and individual bodies, but I also know what it looks like when that goes across the scale of multiply that across, 20, 30, 100 people who are all doing some version of it, right? Like they're not all doing it at the same level. Not everybody has ADHD or they doesn't have it in a certain way, but most people have some variety of a version of this. And Missy, I was thinking as she was talking, as you were asking that question, that what she's pointing out is exactly what we're often doing with people, which is how quickly can you catch that feeling in your body of like upset or rumination or like knowing, right, that you're kind of stuck on something. And then either like take some effective action, right? Like, what is it? What do I want to see happen? And for you, the effective action is writing it down, right? How do you know that? Because you've been doing it and it works, right? Not everybody works that way. Some people write stuff down and brain keeps, they're like, whatever, it's on the paper now, it's in the paper, in the brain, everywhere. Right? But actually like that noticing and then the putting it down gives you freedom to actually get present to whatever you are already doing again, so that you can then make a choice and have a decision to go, oh, I am going to deal with that, or I'm not going to deal with that. It's just part of the universe. That's that person. And I had that conversation. I could go back to it, but I'm going to deal with this other thing. Maybe I'll go back to it. Maybe I won't. And I have a question about sometimes you go back to it and you're like, I just don't need to worry about this now. Right? I set it down for 2 hours. I don't need to pick it back up. It's fine.
I don't think there's ever been a time that I've been like, I don't need to worry about this now. But because, again, I know who I am. So
this is when you're not the glass of water.
No, I'm the mud. I'm the muddy, sloshy. But the difference is the intensity isn't there.
Because your body has already put it down for a little while. When you pick it back up, your body has a different relationship to the idea than it had the first time. Is it partially because you know now that you can have your body both ways while the issue is still going?
I've never thought of it that way. I don't know. I think because I wasn't stuck in there for that long.
Mm-hmm.
Like my body wasn't
replaying it for as long.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It wasn't in that state. And there is for those who don't have, I don't want to give diagnosis. For those who don't experience anxiousness like I do. Because my husband is like easy breezy cover girl. The only thing that stresses my husband out is like if something happens to his family. That's it. Like any money, he's like, money just flows to me. And that man, money flows to him. It is like he has no concern about like a dollar bill. He has no. I'm like, how do you do that? Like he should just walk around and sing like Kumbaya. So he doesn't understand when I get in these, I don't want to call them tizzies, but when I get through in these phases, he doesn't understand it. He's known me for decades, so he gets it that I'm feeling this, but he doesn't understand what it feels like. Just like I don't understand what it's like for him to be like, oh, just living my life.
Right.
But for those who have not experienced this, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Having your body wound up like this it's tiring. So when you have the opportunity to put it down someplace that works for you, your body's then tired. And it's like, that's been released. Now I just need to sit and like rest.
Yeah. I used to have horrifying panic attacks. Like couldn't function, couldn't go to the grocery store with my kids, couldn't do all the things. And I know, and on the flip side of it, right, I'd like do like a collapse, right, on the other side of the panic. Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty intense. It's interesting because I'm thinking about how this relates to showing up. Like, how do you then, right? It's because it is important then for you to have the capacity to catch it and put it down, for you to keep showing up, because you run a whole business here, right? Hopefully you're not planning on like editing this tonight or anything, but but you're going to have to do that and continuously, no matter what life is sort of, lobbing at you, for lack of a better term here. And I imagine, we've all had at least the past couple of years, we've all had at least some shakeups. So yeah, but how do you then, like, what does it mean to show up to you, like to show up to your clients maybe fully? Like, what does it take? Does it take effort? I'm wondering, Missy, for you too, like, did you feel like, because I hear sometimes people saying they have to like pull it together to show up. And, I'm a big fan of playing with like, well, could I show up as though I was sort of still in that pretty, like I'm almost half asleep, but still be fully kind of engaged, so that I'm not having to generate a lot of energy? I mean, I know, right, if it's not your natural state too, or if you're tired or whatever it is, like, so I'm curious, like, how do you think about like what it means to show up? Like, are you tired after a day full of being high energy with people?
Yes.
Are you?
But
Yeah.
but it depends on what I'm doing for the day. Like, so today I had a couple of appointments with a family member, and I had a consultation that was an hour plus long, and we dived into a lot of things in regards to her podcast. And I knew that I had this at 7 p.m. So I took a nap. So I know I can look at my day and know, am I going to need to take a nap? Am I going to need something to rejuvenate myself? Am I going to need like a half an hour of downtime?
Mm-hmm.
And again, that goes back to knowing myself. And because I'm high energy, when I show up for my clients, I don't have to be like blah and then still think, I'm good. Because I can be at like 50% capacity and still essentially show up as who I am. I'm still giving energy. I'm still giving connectivity. I'm still doing the things that I need to do. And I think for me, I need deadlines. I can't have an obscure, oh, you can give me my podcast episode whenever, because I will never give you your podcast episode.
This goes back to the procrastination, right?
It will fall into the void
Me
of
too.
crackers and soup life. Like, you need to give me a deadline, because I know that I have to reverse engineer. And I'm like, we're not the most expensive people, but we are not inexpensive in any way, shape, or form. And I hold my clients in such high esteem that I would never want to not give them the value that they deserve, because they're entrusting us with their podcast, their project, their art, because I consider podcasting an art. And that is, I guess, my push to do phenomenal work, is that I don't want to let my clients down, because they're investing in us. So we need to invest in them by giving them what they deserve.
This is so fascinating to me, Missy. I just talk at their stuff coming up for you, because I have some, like, me, I have so many more questions now than I did before even.
Okay, so for me, showing up is a little bit different, like preparing to show up, right? For like class or for meetings or whatever. I always have this like anxiety beforehand that it's going to be terrible or something's going to go wrong, even though like what's going to go wrong? The power's going to go out, or like what's really going to happen that's going to go wrong. But I have terrible anxiety about it beforehand. So before a meeting or before we have class, I'm usually like sitting here like, okay, we got this, we got this, we got this, and make sure that I have everything ready. And then when it actually starts, it's so much less than I think it's going to be, than I thought it was going to be. It's so much less need, or I don't know I don't know how to explain it, but there's not, what I prepared for is so unnecessary. Right.
It's so interesting because I'm thinking about, I think it was like Laurence Olivier or somebody, right? Like some old school actor. They said like, if they didn't feel stage fright before they went on stage, they'd go run in front of a bus to like get themselves juiced. And it's so interesting because I think I watched people doing a version of this internally a lot of like, I work with high performers really. And so a lot of times there's a sense of like having to be on stage almost. And I think, Missy, it's also that like your version of it might not feel quite like that, but it's a little bit, right? And
kind of idea, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a much smaller stage. There's like 3 people on the stage, but yeah.
But and like Bethany, I'm thinking about you with like, I want to do good work. And I'm wondering like, does that require, if this is for me, this is like a core question about life itself. Does that require energy from me? Right? Because essentially, if I think about what are we doing here? I'm looking at a light box here, I'm sitting in my chair, I'm looking at a light box. And to be fair, when we're done, the way I might go relax is to go sit in front of another light box and watch people talking, which is kind of what I'm doing here, right? And listening. So why would one require more energy from me? And I think the word that comes up for me here is like presence. Right? Am I fully present? Am I actually fully listening? Am I actually like paying attention in a particular way? And what is that particular way that I think costs something? And if I'm doing it here, am I also like, why would I then like, do I want to be not present for parts of my life? Right? Because if I'm going to be Netflix and chilling, I want to be fully present for that too. I hope. Right? So I'm just thinking about like how much of that, I don't know what high energy feels like to you, and like if it's what you're looking at in terms of the, if there's like a cost or whatever, but I do wonder whether or not we need all of that, right? Like Missy, I'm thinking about that little bit of adrenaline before every class, forever and ever. Yeah. And what is that? I mean, the clinician in me is going, what is that doing to your adrenals over time, right? This is, right? It's a miniature panic that we're having. Do we need it? How much of it is useful? And not like because it's bad, but actually just, do we have a choice in it? I think is part of the question that I always have. And am I less present, or am I less effective if I don't have that? Because Bethany, you also wrapped the language of money in here. You're not the most expensive, right? But you're also not the cheapest. And you want to deliver something powerful for your clients. So my question to you is, could you decide that you are powerful at delivering, even if you're not even at 50%, if you're at, say you let yourself run at 10% for the next 3 weeks. Ooh, what, scary? Don't like it? And I don't know, maybe the feeling of 10% is uncomfortable for you, but there's a part of me that wants to play with it a little bit.
I think that the difference between Netflix and chilling and this type of experience that we're doing right now is an exchange of energy.
What do you mean by energy?
So I feel that there is more energy in connecting and in real life versus just watching television or watching like a documentary. Like you can get emotional when you're watching a television or a movie or a documentary, but I feel like that when you are participating in an act of conversation or just being in the presence of somebody else, you're giving to them and they're giving to you.
So I don't believe in that construct at all. Could I tell you about it?
Yes, yes.
So I actually think, I don't know where people got the idea that we were teapots, right? That I could pour into you and you could pour into me and I should only give from my saucer and whatever it is. And because what's true is I'm not a battery, right? I sleep at night, right? So maybe I'm tired. I go back to sleep at the end of the day, or maybe some of us do and some of us don't. But the idea that it has to be a cost to me to like that I'm giving energy or I'm getting energy, it's kind of an interesting idea. It's not sort of in a lot of traditional ideas of what energy actually looks like, because full presence for me doesn't cost me anything. And hopefully you still get all of yourself in my presence. I don't want to be, because that's the other thing to be. I mean, I come from a number of different energy conversations. So that's why I asked like what, right? Because there's physics energy. There's, in the Chinese medicine world, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of energy. In the Reiki world, there's a whole other bunch of kinds of energy. And in Ayurvedic medicine, there's also different kinds of energy. And they're very specific and distinct. And there's whole like levels of techniques around it. But say, if you went into the Reiki world, people would say, oh, I'm streaming energy. Well, I don't know, where are you getting it from? Is it like from the trees or from God or from like, right? And are you streaming it to me? And did I consent to that? And right, all of these kind of conversations. And so I'm always wondering, what's the framework and what's the body then that I'm bringing to a conversation is holding all those philosophical frameworks that I have. Right. Speaking of how to show up and like the invented body, I'll tell a little story about like I was in clinic. I was studying to be an acupuncturist and I was in the student clinic and I was with with another student practitioner. We always had to work in pairs. And so I was actually observing her do a treatment, and she was going to do this treatment. Something about the treatment, she thought the framing that she had was it was going to release some energy from the patient, right? So that was her framing. And so she said, would you like me to put some salt under the table to collect the energy? And what I realized in that moment is before she told me all of these things, I would not have held the idea that the energy could have invaded me, right? It wasn't my energy in the first place. I don't know what she's talking about. How like, and if I was going to use the constructs of classical Chinese medicine, well, I have my own Wei Qi. I have my own, defensive energy, and you can't invade me unless I give you permission to, right? But as soon as she said it, I went, oh, I now know that if she doesn't put the salt under the table, I'm going to have this idea in the back of my head the whole evening that it's possible I've been invaded. So I said, you better go get the fucking salt now. I hope am I allowed to curse? This is my podcast, right?
It's your podcast. You do what you want.
But I recognized not because one construct was true or the other construct was true, but that my body was going to have a question, which it was going to then absorb and believe. We're going to have let's at least do one episode where we talk all about like the different bodies that we've had, because even the way we perceive of our bodies now is a historical construct, right? The idea, the ideas around pregnancy and like a whole bunch of different ways that we perceive our own bodies couldn't have happened in different time frames. But to recognize though, that like this idea of energy and the construct of the capacity to lose energy or give energy or receive energy has a biological impact for us.
I'm so fascinated by this. And
Yeah.
I know that we have to we
We're
have
close.
to wrap
Yeah, we got to wrap
because
up.
wow,
Yeah.
this hour went by so quickly. But I do want to ask you and Missy, do you find when you get around particular people, and now I don't know what words to use because Jade is super smart. So
use them all. So if it's okay with you, what we'll do is use whatever words you want. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to ask questions about what you mean by them, because I don't care which words you use. What I want to know is if I think I understand you, I don't want to be wrong about that, because I may have a different construct about the language that I would, right, how I perceive the same word.
So do you find that when you get around particular people, again, you and Missy, that they are draining to you, that they're just like exhaustive people, that they're quote unquote draining your energy? So you're like, wow, I can only take this particular person in small doses because I feel myself being drained? Or do you not believe that that happens? I'm so like, all right, y'all are gonna have a 3-hour podcast episode.
Well, I'll just give you my quick answers. I used to.
Missy, what about you?
Kind of my same answer, because ever since I've been working with Jade and learning how to recognize things in my body better, I feel like I wouldn't allow that to happen, that I would stop that from being the gong in the room and let myself be the gong in the room.
I love you, bitches.
That's a final note right there. She said, I'm the gong, bitch. You don't set the tone. You don't design the energy.
Gong.
I get to say. So good.
I love it. That's amazing.
Shall we wrap up? Is that it? To be continued?
Would you be interested? I don't know if this is something that you would do, but share maybe, Missy, how you learned to be the gong in the room and what that means to you.
Absolutely. So one of the first skills that we learn is to recognize an upset. So when something is, something's wrong, you feel it in your body. You feel the tightness in your chest, or sweaty palms, or tightness in your neck, or whatever. So once I learned how to notice that and realize that I can change that, it helped me understand that I have a say in what goes on, and other people cannot make me feel upset or angry, because I'm allowing them to let me feel angry. So I'm taking that power back, and that's, yeah.
Wow. I love that. I love that. That's perfect. And this is why you anchor Jade and I, because you just wrap things up so succinctly and you're like, okay, bye, let's go. We need you, Missy.
So good. I was watching, Missy, as you were just doing, I was watching, I was like, I could not have scripted you to do that if I had wanted to. That was such a good advertisement. Like it's so good. And it's such a clear description of how it works.
And it's true.
Yeah, it is taking your power back and saying, oh, wait a second. I don't need to let you drain me.
I've been able to take my power back from my ex-husband many times, from recognizing that something he said has affected me, and saying to myself, what are you doing? Why are you letting this affect you? And stopping it. And well, I don't have contact with him anymore, but I used to be able to do that, and now I don't have to anymore.
And that is how you show up. Yas, queen, yas.
Come see us next time, y'all. All right. We're still on YouTube.